today the Score Esports came up with our top 20 players at Worlds feature. This feature included a list from me, a list from Fion, and a list from Nick Doucette at ImpulseLol on Twitter if you don't follow him or know who he is. Now, in these lists, probably the most controversial placing was Imp at number 7. I think every single top 20 player at Worlds list I've seen published by anyone and their mother, even random people I don't know on Twitter that I see lists retweeted and I'm not sure who they are or not familiar with them, place Imp at number 2. That probably means that I need to explain a little bit more as to why I have him at number 7. I do have some reasoning within the list where I talk about how I feel like Acorn and Pyl are more fundamental to the team, why they're placed over him. I think all of them have had very, very good form in terms of over the course of their careers, and most recently, I think Imp's form was less strong during most of the regular season. It wasn't until like the last 3 weeks where he was playing that he got really, really good. And for most of that, Godway was the primary carry. He did a lot of playmaking, he did a lot of engaging, he played a crazy amount of champions, so he was like a really strong carry. And for me, that's a little bit of a knock to him. But again, it comes down to, I think, in terms of looking at form and all these other things, they're fairly even because Imp performed really, really well in playoffs. Pyl was consistent maybe throughout. Acorn took a little bit of a dip also during the regular season just to take over some of the coaching duties, but this was only noticeable, I think, for a couple of weeks, and otherwise he looked like the best top laner in LPL. He also received the lowest percentage of team gold of top laners in LPL, and was still able to play carry roles, was still able to play utility roles, have very strong TPs in conjunction with Pyl and with other people calling or just moving around the map. Controlling minions in the top lane. Minion control is very important to LGD's identity, if you've heard me rant about that. Difficult for me not to consider Acorn the best player on LGD Gaming, because I think that maybe he and Pyl are the only ones who didn't really decline much in form, didn't have ups and downs this summer, and were just really, really good throughout. Pyl, the first week of LPL, he didn't play. Okay, they had a substitute fan because he was having jaw surgery, and when I say substitute fan, I mean fan. The player was a substitute, not that they just randomly grabbed a fan and had them play. But it may as well have been like a fan. He wasn't extremely bad, but the team just didn't play like they had any idea what they were doing. It was weird. They pretty much did nothing and let Chowgu and Royal Never Give Up run over them. The only game where they really looked like they were doing anything, TBQ played Lee Sin and just hard carried. And actually what happened was Pyl returned to the starting roster earlier than he was originally supposed to, just because, I mean, even Imp came out in his AMA and said, I don't want to play, without Pyl. Effectively, just the team was not doing well without him. And the fact that he had that much of an impact just by being on the team, his playmaking was considerably better than Fen's. He's mechanically very strong with these other things, but just that is really, really big in favor of Pyl as well. And I think that because of the way these players functioned and how they were able to keep form and how LGD was still able to have some semblance of strategy and direction and stay together as a core, it wouldn't have happened without Acorn and Pyl, given the time they spent without a coach. And I think players are very, very fundamental to the team in that way. But even without that aspect, I'm going to talk to you about how LGD tend to win games. And they, outside the coaching situation and the fact that Pyl didn't play first week, and Acorn and Pyl are rated very highly for their leadership and how fundamental they are to keeping the team stable when most teams would probably fall apart in these situations. Even if you disregard that, right, I still think that stylistically, Pyl and Acorn are more important to LGD's identity than Imp is. And the reason I say this is because when you look at how LGD win games, they tend to win early games, and they tend to lane swap very, very frequently. Okay, so why is this important? When they lane swap, and they lane swap 48% of the games, and when you look at that statistically, it's like 2 more games that they played, they didn't lane swap, and they're about 30 of either. I think it's 29 games where they lane swapped and 31 where they didn't. Okay, so really, really high sample sizes for this, so we can kind of draw conclusions from looking at these data. And by lane swap, I do mean sending their dual lane top, so that sometimes you have a double duo top, so that will create some variance and error in these estimates, but in general, when LGD lane swaps, you have 1v2s. So first of all, this shows that why Acorn gets a really, really low percentage of team gold all the time, because he's lane swapping a lot, and he still does really well, has a huge impact in the 1v2, etc. Second thing that happens when that occurs is that PYL will roam a lot. Okay, usually in these situations you have Imp 1v1ing the top laner, and it's really important that he's able to do that. Yeah, and sometimes even when they don't lane swap and it's 2v2, Imp will sometimes even 1v2, so that's really, really good. Okay, I think he's like the only AD carry I can think of who can consistently do that. So he's really great. He's amazing, absolutely. But in terms of the role that he plays in LGD's strategy to win, or LGD's gameplay, it's a little bit smaller than PYL and Acorn, because PYL's proactive roams contributes to their extremely early dragon time, for one thing, which is surprising for a team that lane swaps so often, and also just the fact that they're able to get these gold leads. When PYL roams, he'll roam in conjunction with TBQ, so TBQ doesn't have to gank by himself, and he makes fewer errors in that sense. They do a lot of dives, they play really, really quickly. I mentioned that they have the lowest average game time of any team in the LPL, and they have the second highest gold lead at 20 minutes in wins of any team in the LPL. And this is really important. They're only below OMG. Okay, and OMG are not making it to the World Championship, but it was a little bit lower. But they're above EDG, IG, typically these teams that you think of as having faster early games. Actually, LGD plays the early game much better. They get higher gold leads at 20 minutes from all these roams and all these plays that PYL is making across the map. PYL has an extremely high kill participation. I think he's like top 7 in the league in all roles. And Imp is actually bottom 3 for 80 carries in LPL for kill participation across the course of the league, because he spends most of his time when LGD is getting their leads in the early and mid game, just free farming. Okay, and that's really important, because I think actually the reason why LGD have such low average game times is not just because they get a huge lead in the early to mid game, because EDG does that too, but they're the third highest. They're below LGD, but they're still the third highest gold lead at 20 minutes. But they also have the longest average game time. So EDG can have some problems from the mid to late game, and I think that Imp being able to farm so much helped LGD close a lot better. So I think that was really important. But in general, the game is usually decided within the first 20 minutes, because they also have a really, really high goal deficit in losses at 20 minutes. So usually, before Imp even kind of joins the fights, the game is effectively decided by a lot of these plays that LGD make early without him. For me, when I look at how LGD play and the stars and the ones who are carrying, I think of Acorn, who's able to have a lot of effective teleports to get to places, who's able to push out waves, all these other things that he does really, really well. I think of Godway, obviously. He had a really, really high percentage of team gold, pretty high kill participation. He did a lot of roams in conjunction with PYL, and I think of PYL. Godway obviously had slightly worse form most recently, and he doesn't have the longevity of career of any of these guys, so he's rated lower. And I think Imp stepping up so significantly reduced some of the necessity of Godway having an important game, but I still think that PYL and Acorn are fundamental to the strategy and fundamental to the winning in the early game, while Imp is free farming. Effectively, some of the moves and stuff they make around the map allows Imp to get to the place where he is such a monster, and he is effectively able to just daringly position forward, because he'll just kill you before you get to him. Even in situations where they don't lane swap and they 2v2, they get massive leads in the bottom lane, and usually 2v2s are controlled by supports. I think PYL does extremely well in 2v2s. They often get a lot of kills, all these things. So when LGD win early, it's either because they have such a successful 2v2 or because they're making really proactive plays in lane swaps and leaving the turret up for Imp to free farm. Either way, PYL really, really important to these strategies. Acorn extremely important to these strategies in terms of denying himself, in terms of still making plays, in terms of still having impact, his high versatility. And this is why I think these players overall are better and more important to LGD than Imp is. Don't get me wrong, I still think Imp is a phenomenal player. if I look at that top 7, like I have crazy names with these guys, right? I have Gorilla, I have Rookie, I have Clearlove. So these are all players that I consider extremely important, extremely skilled. So it's almost like splitting hairs when you get down to it. But I do think valuing the most important players to wins is a huge part of my criteria, and it's also why PYL and Acorn are going to be above Imp overall. Now, in these lists, probably the most controversial placing was Imp at number 7. I think every single top 20 player at Worlds list I've seen published by anyone and their mother, even random people I don't know on Twitter that I see lists retweeted, and today the Score Esports came up with our top 20 players at Worlds feature. This feature included a list from me, a list from Fion, and a list from Nick Doucette at ImpulseLol on Twitter if you don't follow him or know who he is. Last 3 weeks where he was playing that he got really, really good. And for most of that, Godway was the primary carry. He did a lot of playmaking, he did a lot of engaging, he played a crazy amount of champions, so he was like a really strong carry. And for me, that's a little bit of a knock to him. But again, I'm not sure who they are or not familiar with them. Place Imp at number 2. That probably means that I need to explain a little bit more as to why I have him at number 7. I do have some reasoning within the list where I talk about how I feel like Acorn and PYL are more fundamental to the team, why they're placed over him. I think all of them have had very, very good form in terms of over the course of their careers, and most recently, I think Imp's form was less strong during most of the regular season. It wasn't until like the